There is a woman in Cleveland, Ohio, who, according to a report published this week, now signs her name Watts. Not Henderson, Watts. She took that name on purpose. She chose it. Somewhere in the state of Wisconsin, inside a maximum security facility called Dodge Correctional Institution, a man who is serving 5 life sentences agreed to give it to her. And if the reporting is accurate, and I want to be careful with that word if, because as I record this it is one outlet and one outlet only, then that name changed hands in the same week as an anniversary. Not just any anniversary, the 13th of August. 8 years ago this week, a woman named Shanann Watts came home at 2 o'clock in the morning from a work trip in Arizona, and she never left that house alive. Neither did her daughters, neither did the son she was carrying. And the man who did that to them is, according to this week's reporting, a married man again. So here's what you're going to know by the end of this. You're going to know exactly what the record shows about the story Chris Watts has told about that night, and how many times that story has changed. You're going to know the names of the women he told each version to, because they are on the record, in his own handwriting. And you're going to know why the timing of this particular week is the part that nobody is talking about yet. That's the promise. 3 things. Stay with me. But first, and this matters more than any of it, I want you to know who we're actually talking about. Shanann Watts was 34 years old. She sold for a company called Lavelle, and she ran that entire business off her phone from her own kitchen table in a 5-bedroom house in Frederick, Colorado. That's who she was. She was the woman who worked from the kitchen table because that's where the kids were. She documented everything relentlessly, joyfully, in a way that some people online later mocked her for, and I want you to sit with how ugly that is for a second. She filmed her life because she loved her life, and one of the things she filmed was the moment she told her husband she was pregnant with their 3rd child. You can watch it, it's been public for years. He comes into frame and his face does something. Confusion first, and then it breaks open into a grin, and he walks toward her and says 4 words. We did it again. Then he leans in and kisses her. 76 days later, Shanann was dead. So were Bella, who was 4. So was Celeste, who was 3. So was the boy they had already named. They'd already picked it, Nico Lee. Before we go any further, I want to hear from you. 8 years, where were you when this case broke, and did you ever think it would end like this? Drop it below. I read them. Now, let's build this properly, because the only way this week's news means anything is if you understand exactly what came before it. Frederick, Colorado, early hours of the 13th of August, 2018. Shanann had been in Arizona on a business trip. She got back to Denver late and a colleague named Nicole Atkinson drove her home. Atkinson dropped her at the house at roughly 2 in the morning. That's on the record. Atkinson is the one who established that timeline. Inside the house was Chris Watts and their 2 daughters. Later that same day, Shanann missed a doctor's appointment. She was 15 weeks pregnant. She did not miss appointments, and she was not answering her phone, which, if you knew Shanann at all, and Nicole Atkinson knew her well, was not a small thing. It was an alarm. Atkinson went to the house. She could not get anyone to the door. She called the police. Now stop there for a second, because I want you to notice something about the architecture of this case that people forget. The person who raised the alarm was not the husband. His wife was gone. His 2 daughters were gone. And the woman who noticed, the woman who drove to that house and stood on that doorstep and called the police, was a co-worker. That's a choice. Somebody made a choice not to call. Over the next 48 hours, you got what a lot of you will remember, because a lot of you watched it live. Chris Watts on the front lawn, on local television in a grey t-shirt, talking to a camera about wanting his family home. It's one of the most watched pieces of footage in modern American crime, and the reason is not that it's dramatic, it's that it's flat. There's a flatness to it that people found unbearable to watch and impossible to stop watching. 2 days later, the 15th of August, Chris Watts went into the Frederick Police Department for a polygraph. And here is a detail from that day that I have never been able to shake, and it's in the released case file, not speculation. He showed up for that polygraph in loose clothing, and he was not wearing his wedding ring. His pregnant wife had been missing for 2 days, his daughters had been missing for 2 days, and the ring was off. He failed the polygraph. Examiners determined he was being deceptive. And that night, under questioning, he gave police his first account of what happened. His first account was that Shanann killed the girls. That's what he said. He said he came downstairs. He said he saw his wife doing something to their children, and he said he lost control and strangled her in a rage. That was version 1. That was the story he gave the moment the walls closed in. On the 16th of August, investigators went to an Anadarko petroleum site, the oil field where he worked, about 45 minutes from the house. They recovered Bella and Celeste from oil storage tanks. Shanann was found nearby, in a shallow grave. I'm not going to go further into that recovery than I just did. You don't need it, and they don't deserve to be described that way. But I will tell you one thing that came out later from investigators, because it belongs to Bella, and I'm not going to leave it out. Investigators said Bella fought back. 4 years old, she fought. On the 6th of November 2018, Chris Watts pleaded guilty. 9 counts. 5 counts of first-degree murder, including the counts for his daughters, plus unlawful termination of a pregnancy for Nico, plus 3 counts of tampering with a deceased human body. Prosecutors took the death penalty off the table in exchange for the plea. He was sentenced to 5 life sentences without the possibility of parole. That December, the Colorado Department of Corrections moved him out of state. They wouldn't say where at first, and they cited security concerns, which is a polite way of saying that men who kill children do not last long in general population. He surfaced on an inmate money transfer website, and that's how the public learned where he'd gone. Dodge Correctional Institution, Waupun, Wisconsin. He has been there ever since. Wisconsin's Department of Corrections has confirmed over the years that he's housed there and that he's held a custodial job inside the facility. He mops floors. That's the shape of his days now. That's the spine. That's what's settled. And I want to be precise about that word, because almost everything I've told you up to this point is on the record. Court documents, the Weld County District Attorney's release of more than 2,000 pages of case file, the plea itself, a state corrections department. Everything after this point gets softer, and I'm going to tell you every single time it does. So let's talk about the story, because the thing about Chris Watts, the thing that separates this case from 1,000 other domestic homicides, is that he has never stopped telling it. And it has never stopped changing. Here's the first strange thing. In February of 2019, 3 months after he was sentenced, investigators went to Wisconsin and sat down with him in prison. This was not a trial. There was nothing left to gain and nothing left to lose. He'd already pleaded. He was already never coming home. Authorities said afterward they believed what they got that day was his first genuinely full account of what happened. And in that interview, he took back version 1. He admitted that the story about Shanann killing the girls was a lie. He admitted he was solely responsible. He said he strangled Shanann in their bed after telling her the marriage was over, and that she said he'd never see his children again. Then he drove her body and his 2 living daughters to the oil field. Bella and Celeste were alive in that vehicle. They were alive for that drive, and he smothered them there. But that's not the part that stopped me. The part that stopped me is how he explained where version 1 came from. He told investigators that the detectives were the ones who first raised the idea that Shanann might have hurt the children. And then he said that he, and this is his own phrasing, 4 words, just went with it. Read that again. He didn't invent the story that his murdered wife killed her own babies. He says he was offered it, and he took it because it was available, because someone put it on the table in front of him, and it fit better than the truth. That's not a man lying under pressure. Everybody lies under pressure. That's a man selecting from options based on what the room seems to want to hear. Hold on to that, because it's going to happen again and again and again. And by the end of this, you're going to see it happen with a wedding ring on. Here's the second strange thing. Once he was inside, the letters started. Not from him at first, to him. In December of 2018, prosecutors released dozens of letters that had been sent to Chris Watts by women he had never met. This was within weeks of his conviction. Women writing to a man who had strangled a pregnant woman and smothered 2 toddlers, telling him they felt a connection to him. One of them sent a photograph of herself. And I want to be careful here, because it would be easy and cheap to spend this whole video sneering at women who write to prisoners. That's a real phenomenon. Psychologists have studied it for decades, and it's more complicated than a punchline. But I raise it for one specific reason. From the very beginning of his sentence, Chris Watts had an audience, and it was an audience that had already decided to be sympathetic before he said a single word to them. Ask yourself what a man like this does with an audience like that. Now, actually, hold that thought. I said drop a comment and tell me where you were watching from when this broke. Do that, but hold it for 1 more minute, because I need to show you the next piece before you'll understand why the letters matter. Here's the third strange thing. He got a cellmate, and that cellmate wrote books. A man named Dylan Tallman was housed with Chris Watts at Dodge and has since published a series of accounts about that time. Letters from Watts to Tallman were reported by the New York Post, and in those letters you get Chris Watts explaining his marriage to another man in a cell with nobody performing for a jury. He described Shanann as being consumed by her work. He described himself as the one carrying the daughters. And when he got to Nicole Kessinger, the co-worker he had been involved with in the months before the murders, he reached for a phrase. He called her the forbidden fruit. He also, in that same body of correspondence, described her as the thing that destroyed him. Now, follow the logic of that sentence, because it's doing something. In that framing, Chris Watts isn't the actor. He's the one acted upon. Shanann is too busy. Kessinger is a temptation. He is a man standing in a garden being handed things. Everything that happened to him. That's version 2. Different room, different listener, different story. And Kessinger herself. Kessinger went to the police. That is a matter of record. She told investigators she had believed he was going through an amicable divorce, and the moment she heard his family was missing, she walked into a police station on her own. In her interview with Thornton police, she described the marriage as she understood it from his side, that he'd told her they didn't get along, that money was a problem, that he wanted a son. Everything Kessinger knew about that marriage, she knew because Chris Watts told her, which means we have documentation of him telling a version of his life to a woman he was involved with while he was living an entirely different one before the murders. That is the pattern operating in real time, and it is on the record. So here's my question, and I want you to actually sit with it. If the story changed for the police, and it changed for the cellmate, and it had already been changing for Kessinger before any of this happened, what exactly is it changing for? That's the question this whole video is built on, and the answer is coming. Here's the fourth strange thing, and this is where it starts to get uncomfortable. He found God. Or, let me phrase that the way the record supports. He began telling people he had found God. In letters reported over the past several years, Chris Watts started writing to correspondents in the language of Christian conversion. He wrote about being forgiven. He wrote about being a new creation, quoting scripture directly, 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 17, the verse about old things passing away. And I want to say something here that I think matters, because a lot of this channel's audience are people of faith, and I am not going to insult you. Jailhouse conversion is real. It happens. There are men and women in prisons in this country whose faith is the most genuine thing about them, and the fact that some people fake it does not mean all of them do. I'm not here to audit anybody's soul. I can't see into one, neither can you, so I'm not going to tell you Chris Watts is lying about God. I'm going to tell you what he wrote around it. Because in the same body of correspondence where he claims to have taken full responsibility for what he did, he also wrote that he had been misled by a wicked woman. Same letters, same man, full responsibility, and misled. Those two things cannot both be the center of a sentence. One of them is the real one, and the other one is decoration. And elsewhere, he went further, addressing himself directly to God, describing Kessinger in the oldest language available to him, a temptress, an evil woman, someone who would face judgment. Nicole Kessinger was a co-worker who was lied to about a divorce and who went to the police the moment she suspected something was wrong. In his account of his own life, she is the villain. Do you see the shape it makes? Every version of this story has a woman in the load-bearing position. Shanann killed the girls, version 1. Shanann was too consumed with work, version 2. Kessinger was the forbidden fruit, the wicked woman, the one who led him off the path, version 3. And in the newest one, God himself is the author of his imprisonment. There is a version of this story for every listener, and in not one single version is Chris Watts the man who decided. Here's the fifth strange thing, and this is the one I've been building toward. Her name, the name we've been given, is Deborah. In January of this year, letters were reported that Chris Watts had written to a woman identified only by that first name. She said she had first written to him back in 2022. So this is a correspondence with years in it, not a stray letter, a relationship, in whatever sense that word survives across a prison wall. And in those letters, dated October of 2025, so less than a year ago, he wrote something I have not been able to put down since I read it. He told her his imprisonment was God's will, and then he compared it to the crucifixion. He wrote that it was God's will for him to be in prison the way it was God's will for Jesus to die, and that God intended to bring people closer to himself through Chris Watts's suffering. Sit in that for a second. The suffering being referenced here belongs to a man who is alive, who is fed 3 times a day, who has a job, who receives mail, and who is in that building because he strangled his pregnant wife and smothered his 2 daughters. He is describing that as his suffering. Redemptive, purposeful, assigned to him by heaven for the benefit of others. And Shanann, Bella, Celeste, Nico, They don't appear in that theology at all. They're not even the cost. They've been edited out of the story entirely. In his account of his own life, the tragedy is what's being done to him. Now here is where it turns. Here's the part I promised you. Because in late 2025, according to the same reporting, he told Deborah that the two of them couldn't be together, and he gave her a reason. He didn't say, "I'm serving 5 life sentences and I will die in this building." He didn't say, "I murdered 4 people and I don't get to have this." He wrote that God had other plans for his life. God. Other plans. Not his fault, not his choice, not even his decision to end it. He let her down using the same author he'd been using for everything else. And then, months later, this week, the Daily Mail reported that Chris Watts has secretly married a woman from Cleveland, Ohio, named Lizzie Henderson. That's it. That's the whole thing right there. And I want to lay it out slowly because it took me a full day to see how clean it is. In October of 2025, he tells one woman that God is the reason he is in prison and that his suffering has a purpose. In late 2025, he tells that same woman that God is the reason they cannot be together. And in August of 2026, according to this week's report, he is married to somebody else. Every promise I made you at the top of this video lands in that sequence. I told you you'd know how many times the story changed. Count them. It changed for the detectives in the interview room. It changed in the letters to a cellmate. It changed for Kessinger while she was still in it. It changed into scripture for Deborah. And then it changed again for a woman in Cleveland in a way none of us can read because those letters aren't public. I told you you'd know the names, and you do. They're not anonymous. They're in his handwriting, in reporting, in court files. Shanann, Kessinger, Sherlyn Cadle, the 72-year-old author who described herself as a mother figure to him and who published his correspondence. Dylan Tallman, the cellmate with the books. Deborah. And now, reportedly, Lizzie. And I told you you'd know why the timing is the part nobody's talking about. So, let's talk about it. The 13th of August is this week. It is the 8th anniversary of the morning Shanann Watts came home from Arizona. And the report that broke this story, the report that put the marriage into the public record, landed in that same week. The Mail's coverage references something that happened on the anniversary itself, and I want to be extremely clear with you here. I am not going to characterize that detail because I'm not going to build a claim on a headline I can't fully verify. If that changes, I'll come back and tell you. But the week itself is not in dispute. The date is not in dispute. And here's what I keep coming back to. A marriage inside a Wisconsin prison is not a spontaneous act. It is not two people deciding something over a phone call. Wisconsin requires an inmate to apply. It requires approval from the institution. There is a process, there is paperwork, there is a warden. Which means whenever this happened, somebody planned it. Somebody filled in forms, somebody picked a window. And this is the man who has spent 8 years telling everyone who will listen that he is not the one who decides, that he was misled, that he just went with it, that God had other plans, he decided this. That's what I want you to take out of this video. Strip away the theology and the letters and the pen pals and the books. For 8 years, in every account he has given, the through line has been that Chris Watts is a passive man in a world of women who did things to him. And then, this week, in the same 7 days as the anniversary of the morning he strangled his pregnant wife, he did something that required an application, an approval, and a date on a calendar. That's not a man things happen to. That's a choice. Somebody made a choice. Now, let me be honest with you about what I don't know, because that's the deal on this channel, and I'm not going to break it in the one video where it'd be easiest to. As I record this, the marriage is single-sourced. One outlet, the Daily Mail. No second publication has confirmed it. The Wisconsin Department of Corrections has not, to my knowledge, publicly confirmed it. Nothing here is settled. Now, I'll tell you that the Mail has been ahead of this case repeatedly. They're the ones who published the Deborah letters in January. They're the ones who ran the Cherlin-Cadle interviews in March. They have had a live line into this man's correspondence for years, and they have not been wrong about it yet. So my honest assessment is that it's probably real, probably is not confirmed. And on the woman herself, I'm going to say this plainly once, and then I'm going to move on. I am not going to speculate about Lizzie Henderson, not about her motives, not about her history, not about her state of mind. Everything I've told you about her comes from one report and amounts to a name, a city, and the fact that she has reportedly taken his surname. Marrying a prisoner is not a crime. She has not been accused of anything by anyone. This isn't an accusation, and there's nothing in the record to accuse her of. Whatever you think about the choice, it's a choice she's legally entitled to make, and the comment section under this video is not a courtroom. The person on trial in this video has already been convicted. He pleaded guilty. He is exactly where he should be. Here's the version where nothing goes wrong. Shanann gets home at 2 in the morning on the 13th of August, 2018. She's exhausted. Arizona was a long trip, and she's 15 weeks pregnant, and her back hurts, and she just wants her bed. She goes upstairs. She sleeps. In the morning, there's noise in the house, because there is always noise in that house. Bella is 4, and Bella has opinions. Celeste is 3, and Celeste is faster than she should be. Shanann makes the doctor's appointment she was supposed to make, and everything is fine, and she films a little of it because that's what she does, because she loved her life and she wanted it written down. In January, Nico Lee is born. He'd be 7 now. He'd be starting 2nd grade this month. Bella would be 12, with a phone she wasn't supposed to have, arguing about it. Celeste would be 11. Shanann would be 42. They'd all be in somebody's kitchen this week, and the 13th of August would be nothing. A Thursday. A day you drive through without noticing. That's the version. That's what was taken. Not just 4 lives. Every ordinary Thursday that was supposed to come after. So let's be clear on what's confirmed and what isn't. One last time. Confirmed. Chris Watts murdered Shanann, Bella, Celeste, and Nico in August of 2018. He pleaded guilty to 9 counts. He is serving 5 life sentences at Dodge Correctional Institution in Wisconsin, and he will die there. He first blamed Shanann for the deaths of her own daughters, and later admitted in a prison interview with investigators that this was a lie he adopted after somebody else suggested it. Reported, but not confirmed, that in August of 2026, in the same week as the 8th anniversary, he married a woman from Cleveland named Lizzie Henderson, and that she now goes by his name, and here's what's still open, the thing I can't close and neither can you. 8 years, 5 life sentences, a guilty plea, a full confession, every possible incentive to stop performing. Because there is no jury left to convince and no sentence left to reduce, and he's still telling it, still writing, still explaining, still handing a version of himself to whoever picks up the pen next. Why does a man who has already confessed to everything still need somebody to believe him? If this landed, hit the like button. Not for me, for them. It's the single thing that pushes this in front of people who only ever knew the headline and Shanann and Bella and Celeste deserve to be more than a headline this week of all weeks. Share it with somebody who thinks this case ended in 2018. It didn't. It's still moving. It moved this week. And subscribe. Because if a second outlet confirms this, or if the Wisconsin Department of Corrections puts a document behind it, or if it turns out to be wrong, I will come back and I will tell you either way. That's the whole point. The file stays open. Every claim gets checked. Every source gets named. So tell me, 8 years on, with the plea signed and the sentence handed down and nothing left to gain, why do you think he's still talking? I'll see you in the comments.